Hi everyone, my name is Lynn Garrick and I have the pleasure of introducing Linda Gurash. Dr. Linda Gurash has worked with developmental and behavioral disorders throughout her career as a pediatrician. Her extensive experience with Prader-Willi syndrome began in 1998 and she has worked with autistic spectrum disorder since 1980. She has worked on multidisciplinary teams serving families and children and adults with Prader-Willi syndrome in both inpatient and outpatient settings. In her private practice with local patients, Dr. Gurash uses parent and family education and behavioral management as a cornerstone intervention, in addition to behavioral plans and medication. Dr. Gurash has served on the board of directors of the Prader-Willi Syndrome Association, USA. She is currently providing clinical consultation for the International Prader-Willi Syndrome Association and PWS USA. She provides consultation and educational programs throughout the United States and internationally through Pittsburgh Partnership, who specializes in Prader-Willi syndrome. Take it over. Thanks, Linda.
Thank you. So for the last year, I haven't been getting out much, so I wore my pearls. So the title of this talk is A Global Comprehensive Understanding of Food, Behavior, and Food and Behavior in Prader-Willi Syndrome. It's a deliberately grandiose title because I think that we are always looking for some simple paradigm. So this is not a neurologic report. This is based on years of helping family with Prader-Willi syndrome behavior, of direct observation of patients, parents, the children, getting it right, getting it wrong, long interviews to try to understand exactly what is influencing behavior minute to minute within the family. And when I say long interviews, I mean because you need so much detail so that you don't misinterpret the behavior. But out of that comes some paradigms. So my definition of a paradigm is a functional oversimplification, emphasis on the word functional, because, let me get my pointer, because it enables us to interpret the behavior correctly and to come up with an intervention that's actually appropriate. So it's functional because it's useful in understanding Prader-Willi behaviors. So here's the paradigm. Within the paradigm, if it's a perfect paradigm, you get the right answer. Outside the paradigm, you get the wrong answer. No paradigm is completely perfect, so sometimes the wrong answer is within the paradigm and sometimes the right answer is outside of the paradigm. These are the things I'm going to develop, the ideas I'm going to develop today. This is management of the reward-driven behaviors in Prader-Willi syndrome, food and beverage-related behaviors, and the short story is food security is crucial and effective. Non-food-related reward-driven behaviors are also managed with food security principles, but social reward sometimes can be handled with food security principles, that is the positive and healthy social reward. But there are negative social rewards that people with Prader-Willi syndrome are motivated by. An example is triangulation. And in this case, it takes a parental two-step to get around this. Food security principles won't be adequate. So, reward-driven behaviors include food seeking and overeating and non-food related seeking behaviors. Another major part of the Prader-Willi personality is the cognitive rigidity, which creates stress sensitivity and produces the disruptive behaviors due to their sensitivity to uncertainty and due to their sensitivity to disappointment. And we're going to try to use this to our advantage. So, first paradigm shift I want to suggest is that the reward, that we're dealing with primarily reward, not hunger. So reward-seeking behavior can be relentless, And it is the same for food and non-food preferred items such as tobacco, creams, lotions, preferred activities, iPad. But that behavior is just as insatiable. Enough is never enough. I know that many parents have to use little bottles of toiletries so that the entire bottle of shampoo is not emptied out in a single shower, that kind of thing. We have seen the exact same ingenious seeking behaviors for tobacco products in those individuals who use them that we see for food. Okay. Now, we start with the very, very common false assumption and false paradigm. If you eat a lot, you must be very hungry. Unfortunately, there's a false corollary to that. If you are very hungry, no wonder you are cranky and irritable. And then the consequence of that is maybe if I feed you a little extra, you and I will feel better. Now, excluding all grandparents who attend Prader-Willi syndrome conferences, I call this the grandparent paradigm. We have a technical term which actually serves a purpose. It's called hyperphagia. Hyper, meaning too much or excessive, phagia from the word to eat. And this basically describes the behavior without assigning causality. And this is very helpful. And because the actual causality of the behavior is not entirely neurologically understood, this is a very appropriate term rather than the term hunger. This was a famous study done in the 1980s. Many of you have probably already seen this. And it shows obese children compared to Prader-Willi syndrome children. And what they did was they would put a quarter sandwich out on a plate and the children could eat the sandwich, and then they would replace that sandwich quarter with another sandwich quarter and the child could eat that. And you'll see that the obese children all stopped eating basically between 10 and 20 minutes. And by the way, if they had done this with lean children based on other data, it probably would have been 10 minutes where all these lines go flat. So this represents the satiety or the satiety that the children experience. They stop on their own despite the availability of more food. So the Prader-Willi group, it's rather startling. As you can see, some of them barely slow down, but a number of them stop eating. And this is a great graph to show the variability also, even within a group of 10 children, of the hyperphagia that we see in Prader-Willi syndrome. There are many, many signals back to the brain that tell us that we are going to be getting full and cause us to slow down our intake. And it actually includes the body's ability to recognize whether we are eating high calorie or low calorie foods. But those signals we know are deficient in Prader-Willi syndrome. They're not absent, they're just deficient. Well, could hunger signals also be blunted? In our clinical experience, we know that infants with Prader-Willi syndrome are disinterested in food and they cry very little. And you can argue whether or not this is primarily due to the hypotonia. But in older individuals, we see anorexia with refusal to eat, excessive weight loss, has been observed in a number of persons with the syndrome. Persons with the syndrome under continuous inpatient observation in our experience in the hospital universally appeared to tolerate very low calorie diets, 600 calories a day, with steady weight loss very comfortably. They express satisfaction with their food when they are given large volume portions of low calorie, high fiber foods, and they have food security, which I will describe in much more detail. Could hunger signals be blunted? What else? Families also report they are successful at home, sustaining patient satisfaction, using the same techniques with 800 calories a day. And we also see people with Prader-Willi syndrome occasionally refuse to eat. We've seen it as a result of anger, stubbornness, depression, or psychotic illness. And sometimes it's the only sign initially recognized. We saw one woman who left us and went on a 2-week hunger strike because she didn't like the exercise program that we had recommended. This is a 200 calorie lunch, very high volume of food, visually looks like a lot of food. You'll notice that the condiments are all packaged, so there are limits. Not everyone does this, not everyone needs this. This was basically used as a tool to transition people from a high calorie diet to a low calorie diet. It's not always necessary. There are non-nutritive ingestive excesses seen routinely or almost universally in persons with Prader-Willi. Overuse of non-nutritive flavored beverages. These generally, if they're flavored, they need to be controlled. Overuse of tobacco and cigarettes, overuse of nutritional supplements and over-the-counter medications, overuse of condiments. They will collect excessive numbers of CDs, videos, Beanie Babies. Here is just a personality trait of there's enough is never enough. We also know that there are physical signs of impaired feedback to people with Prader-Willi syndrome, which is probably a combination of neurologic and social feedback. And so I've sometimes postulated just as a paradigm for parents that we don't know the underlying defect, but there does seem to be a global feedback failure or a lack of satiety for all kinds of things. So that in a typical person, normal drives are balanced out by feedback, and it seems in Prader-Willi syndrome, the feedback is attenuated, decreased, and these are all areas where we can see decreased feedback. Are these just behavioral samples analogous, or is there a common neural basis? I don't know. But I do want to give you a way of thinking about this change in paradigm with the car model of eating behavior. So the drive to eat, represented by the car moving forward, is hunger and is represented by the accelerator. And the key question is, if you take your foot off the accelerator, does the car stop? We need brakes. And that's why satiety or lack of satiety is not the same as hunger. And lack of brakes is not the same as taking your foot off the accelerator. We could call emergency brakes the other things that might stop us from overeating when we are, say, at a very, very nice buffet. Nausea, pain, or even disgust can stop us from overeating. People with Prader-Willi syndrome clearly have reduced signals of nausea, pain, and disgust. So here's a representation of those phenomena. Next, we put the car on a hill, and the hill represents a food-rich environment. And gravity is the force that moves the car down the hill. We believe that gravity is the representation of reward, and that reward is driving the car forward. People with Prader-Willi syndrome seem to have a heightened pleasure or reward drive. Lots of people have commented on how much they enjoy their food, that they even enjoy their very low calorie diet foods. So in a typical person, these forces are balanced: hunger, reward, satiety, nausea, pain. Keep things in check, keep things balanced. We are postulating that people with Prader-Willi syndrome have an enhanced experience of reward. Their hunger may actually be diminished. That is somewhat controversial. No question that their satiety is diminished, their brakes, and no question that pain and disgust are not as operative in the person with Prader-Willi syndrome. So now we want to focus on the role of reward. This is just my Pittsburgh jokes, because you can't go anywhere without ending up on a hill around here. Okay, now again, I'm not claiming that they have no satiety. In fact, the studies show that they do experience some satiety. It's weak, it can be overridden by highly pleasurable foods, and it's also short-lived. but they probably do move between slightly hungry, neutral, and pleasantly satisfied, with the extremes of sensation not as operative. So another way of looking at the infant to later in life, the infants we know are not particularly driven by reward, whereas reward circuitry comes into play, and that may have something to do with the switch to excessive eating. So something else that caught my attention when we did the Prader-Willi personality questionnaire, which looks at 6 areas of food drive, non-food drive, sensory hunger and skin picking, stress sensitivity, and impulsive and disruptive behavior, and cognitive rigidity, looking at the contribution of each of these categories to behavior problems. Parents and caregivers filled out the questionnaire. And I'm going to focus on these 3, although the others are still relevant. Here are the food-related drive questions, the non-food related drive questions. We put together the scores and develop a radiograph where points, there are 6, as you can see, 6 areas, and points that are farther away from the center are higher scores, and points that are close to the center are lower scores. And look at this, what do you know? Non-food and food drive scores are exactly the same. And cognitive rigidity turns out to be the factor that's most impactful in the family environment or in the living environment, and has the most effects on behavior. And this is probably one of the biggest discrepancies between the experience of parents and other people who are looking at Prader-Willi syndrome. Other people underestimate this non-food drive, and they underestimate the role of the cognitive rigidity, and therefore often make mistakes because of that. Particularly researchers or people who have casual involvement with Prader-Willi syndrome are primarily conscious or aware of the food drive. So we want to return that both food and non-food are primarily reward driven. And this is complicated by that cognitive rigidity, but we're going to use that cognitive rigidity when we use food security, because even more than food, they crave predictability. And we give them predictability when we give them food security. This predictability comes from their cognitive rigidity. And so they can accept the rules because they can understand, once those are established, that they feel better when they have that predictability, which is basically what we mean by food security. So very quickly running to food security, I mainly want to make the distinction between food security and food control. And many people use the terms interchangeably, and I'd like to correct that because you miss a lot of the value of real food security if you equate it with food control. Now, food control is necessary. I show with the lock. Not everyone needs locks, but some kind of food control is necessary for the vast majority of individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome. But it's usually not enough. Food control, basically I put into 2 categories. The zone defense, that's when the individual is in a location where they spend a lot of time, home, school, workplace, and the food is controlled by locks, rules, and alarms. When you move to man, this refers to when you're out shopping, maybe on the school bus, going to social or church events, and you've got rules, you've got incentives maybe for not getting into trouble, but mostly you've got constant vigilance, and that's the man-to-man. So when they're in the zone, they may not need man-to-man, but you get outside the safety zone where food is controlled and you need constant vigilance. Now that's the basic, those are the basics. With food security, we are also affecting behavior by giving the person psychological security concerning food. So food security does not automatically come with weight control. You can have a skinny person who does not have food security. It doesn't automatically come with your calorie control, and it doesn't automatically come with your food control. It's actually what's going on inside your child's head. And this is because any uncertainty about food becomes stress for your child. And we know that stress has a huge influence on your child's behavior, irritability, arguing, tantrums, even self-injury. So we've broken food security down into a mantra of no doubt, no chance. This gets translated different ways, no opportunity. We've called it no doubt, no hope, no disappointment, no false expectations. And food security is really about managing the expectations inside your child's head. It varies with each child. It depends on age. His overall level of anxiety, I think, that would relate to his ability to tolerate uncertainty and also past experience, whether or not he associates a certain location or a certain person with food, or has he learned not to associate that location with food. So this is our mantra, starting with no doubt. We do all the things in the environment that Dr. Forster talked about. What are we going to eat? How much will there be in the schedule? Where do meals fit into the day? Many families are using an unwritten routine, nothing wrong with that. These are things we do when you have to tighten up on your food security. You may need to do a more written, more formal program. Lots of kids just trust their parents that they will get what they need. Those are kids who just have food security because they've had it from the get-go. This is a wonderful thing that's happened in the last decade or two with Prader-Willi syndrome. We didn't have that before. So here's an example of the menu. It's good to have a plan for some people who need to know what happens with meals away from home, what happens if mom's away, what is going to happen during special occasions. All of this can be pre-planned if you find you are having problems around those situations. Power failure, no time to cook, forgot something. Your child may do well knowing, don't worry, we always have peanut butter, we always have tuna fish. Okay, I'm gonna skip over some of this to no hope or no chance. This is really about no false expectations. So before the individual even starts thinking that he or she is going to get food, we try to put a lock on the thought. And this is a little more complicated than the no doubt side of the equation. But by avoiding false expectations, we avoid disappointment. And when you are having tantrums that seem to come out of nowhere, there may have been an unrecognized expectation that was due to the child's perception of a chance or an opportunity. So all of the things that you do to control food also eliminate these false expectations. So these are things that I think most of you are probably already doing. Some things are variable from child to child. I'm not going to go through them all. This is actually old news, I hope, for most people. Oh, here's one little trick I like. Sometimes there's some conflict when siblings ask for and receive seconds. And what I like to suggest, if that becomes a conflict, is your child can sit down at the table. He has his plate of food, and then he has another smaller plate, which is his seconds. He can see them there, so he has no doubts about getting them. It's already built into his calorie count. It's important, no unplanned treats, because that creates false expectations in the future. This is really hard to explain to people who want to take the approach of, oh, it's just a little bit, and it's not, it's diet, it's fat-free. They don't understand that is irrelevant. Giving in to tantrums is probably the worst thing anyone can do because it teaches the child to tantrum. Negotiations, no arguments about food at the table. You can have a monthly meeting and direct them to that meeting. Well, we discuss your diet on the third Tuesday of the month, and I'll be happy to discuss other things that you would like in your schedule. For the most part, no money or no access to money other than say what they need that day to buy something. But generally speaking, they can't handle or have access to money, even if they earned it themselves. Okay, the opportunities come when there is time unsupervised, locks unlocks, food left out, friends over, parties, birthdays, holidays, past history of making exceptions just this once. These all create false hopes. Some of the pitfalls that we see people fall into is using food as a reward or bribery with food. They do this because they know it's highly motivating, but it's actually too motivating. They're setting the stakes too high and they create anxiety and meltdowns. Dietitians sometimes don't understand that you cannot use free foods with people with Prader-Willi syndrome. The fact that the foods are calorie free does not mean is not acceptable. They cannot have anything ad lib that has flavor. And using food loss as a punishment or consequence, again, is the flip side of using it as reward or bribery. This is too much stress on the person with Prader-Willi syndrome, with one exception. So achieving food security, it's different for different people. The requirements change with age, never completely internalized. I've seen people have food security for years and then lose it because of a change in their environment. It's easily lost in a food-rich environment. Some early skills, which really you can carry on to all ages: my food, your food rules. When you have a toddler, do not feed the child from your plate. Teach him to eat only what's on his plate, what has been given to him by his or her parent. Parent prepares the plate. The entire meal is within view and reach. I'll explain why, but introducing sweets or surprises really drives that reward system. You try to make food as matter of fact as possible. This feeds back to our paradigm that reward is driving the interest in food. Carbohydrates tend to be the big issue. We don't eliminate all carbohydrates, generally speaking, but it's really high carb foods and sweets are what really drive the reward. Whoops. Okay. In adolescence, it gets, well, in grade school, the challenge is that you have to re-educate the teacher every year unless the child has the same teacher. Most kids with Prader-Willi syndrome do have a one-to-one aide who also generally needs to be trained. And you can introduce the idea of doing social stories, which are food stories. What would you do if you found this food sitting on your teacher's desk, or this food sitting here? And you can have them recite what they should do. Will they do it at the time? Not necessarily, but they can. We've seen it. Especially if they are not left alone with that food for too long. And I love the incident where a young man called his mother from his residential group home, and he said, "Mom, there was a birthday here. There's a cake downstairs. Please come get it." So he was able to resist the cake, but he also knew he didn't want to spend all night resisting the cake. So he did a very sensible thing. And if you teach somebody ahead of time, they might be able to do that. Their IEP should have a pre-established, defined low-key response for food stealing. Adolescence is difficult because the peer group, the transportation, the money, the food-rich environment, you are constantly reassessing the increased opportunities for extra food. I think that for most kids, we are able to move them out of the mainstream Generally, even if they are very bright and handling the academics, they start to fail socially around middle school. They can't process things fast enough to keep up with the middle school social environment. And if you have the opportunity to move your child into a self-contained classroom and continue to have an aide, the schools do fight the aides. They think they don't need them in adolescence, but they do. For food stealing, the response is pre-planned, unchanging. The child and everybody involved knows what it is. Doesn't depend on the amount stolen. It's very token. And the consequence is maybe, and you don't even have to do this, but you might consequence the behavior just so you make it clear that it's not an acceptable behavior. They may lose 100 calorie carb for one meal. It's over by bedtime. Don't carry it over. And you don't even have to do that. Do not try to take the food away from the child. Instruct everyone on this. Do not make threats. Do not blame yourself or others or the child or Prader-Willi syndrome. Later, you want to reflect and remind with the child, what could you have done? And more important, reflect with the family or the school team circumstances allowing the theft, review the procedures, and do any training you need for prevention. I like to call the scale the unauthorized access detector. Frequent weighing. Lots of parents do not weigh their kids frequently because their weight is good and they can tell they're gaining substantial weight when their clothes get tight. However, as your child gets older, it is very useful to have a routine weighing. You don't comment on the weight, positive or negative, so the child doesn't refuse to get weighed because there's no comment. It doesn't become a significant event in the day. You just weigh them, write it down, say thank you, and that's the end of it. You may do it 3 times a week, for instance. It's very, very helpful. It's very, very helpful because if the child is gaining weight because of access to food that you don't know about, you will pick it up way faster before he gets all that reward reinforcement. If you see that there is an upward drift in the weight. And sometimes you can also see the weights going up during the week and it's dropping on the weekend. That tells you he's getting it in the workplace or in the school. If he's getting it on the weekend, but not gaining during the week, that may tell you that you don't have enough structure or supervision on the weekend. It's really a very, very useful thing, but only if you write down the weight each time you weigh and keep a notebook with those weights, and then you can see trends. We have a food security checklist on our website, which helps you sort of identify possible areas that still need work. Like to say that food security is the first thing we're going to prescribe for behavior, not medication. This picture I just love, and I thank this young lady's mom. She made a decision that her daughter was not going to have sweets. And they were at a party and time for her daughter to eat, there was no place to sit except at the dessert table. I have seen this also in the hospital, that when people have perfect food security, to her, these sweets, first place, she's never experienced them, but also they're irrelevant. This is what is relevant to her. And that's her own vegetables and turkey, her diet, her food. And that's perfect food security as far as I'm concerned. Okay, so I promised I would talk about other reward-driven behaviors. Food and beverage related, food security is crucial. Non-food related, you can take anything else that's important to the person with Prader-Willi syndrome and use the no doubt, no hope, no disappointment paradigm. This works with things that are important, like iPads. You know when you're going to get it, you know when you're not going to get it. Anything else that's very, very important to a person with Prader-Willi syndrome because it's rewarding. And there's also social reward, and the social reward can be positive and healthy, or it can be negative. Let me go through some of this. Non-food rewards can be highly motivating. We're talking about material or psychological. By material, I mean things like the iPad. Psychological can be is just something they enjoy doing and an activity or a person that they enjoy time with. And you can actually build these into part of a behavior plan, but you remain in control of the reward. They will try to get in control of the amount of reward, but in this situation, you can control these rewards. Positive social reward, very similar, the same thing. They're healthy and they are rewarding to the person with Prader-Willi syndrome. Visits with preferred friends or relatives or a neighbor's pet likely will need external controls. However, you can use the no doubt, no hope, no disappointment. You schedule these highly rewarding things into their week or into their day. And you can use them as part of behavior plans. So I've seen behavior plans where an individual works for a whole week so he can go to the pet store and look at the bunnies. Okay. Negative social reward comes when triangulation is happening. And this can be very subtle and it can be very destructive. One of the problems is the PWS police. This is the often girls, but boys too, start bossing around other members of the family. Here's the rule, and it looks brutal, but it is what you have to do. Never side with the person with PWS, at least not in front of him or her. So we can, here's the trap. Very normal parental behavior, and you get sucked in. Mother, Charlie has his feet on the new coffee table. Sucker mom says, Charlie, get your feet off the new coffee table. I told you not to do that. Very normal mom thing to do, right? But she has inadvertently rewarded her child with Prader-Willi syndrome because Charlie is now in trouble with mom, and this is better than crack cocaine when you're talking about reward. Okay, blocking the reward, the trap. Mom, Charlie has his feet on the new coffee table. Savvy mom, matter-of-factly, thank you, dear. Or remember the rule, no tattling, okay? Savvy mom will speak with Charlie later and in private. This is a crucial skill to have because almost every family inadvertently rewards this behavior without recognizing how rewarding getting a sibling into trouble is. It is something kind of unique to Prader-Willi syndrome. I don't know any other group of kids who are quite as rewarded by this. What you're trying to do is never empower the person with Prader-Willi syndrome to get someone else into trouble. When you empower them, we're back to crack cocaine. Parent triangulation is just as damaging, extremely damaging. Here's a typical scenario. One parent is a little bit more prone to use a harsh tone when they get frustrated. The other parent can see the negative results, can see that this is going nowhere good, or even that the child is going into a meltdown. That parent does a very natural thing, corrects the first parent in front of the person with Prader-Willi syndrome, inadvertently undermining the first parent who feels undermined and is quite angry about it. But the first parent is also responsible for this because the first parent continues, if the first parent continues to use a harsh tone, the cycle is perpetuated. These parents need to have a private conversation about this phenomenon and sort out what they want to do. Persons with Prader-Willi syndrome more than anybody else may deliberately provoke other members of the family to get them into trouble. So the private discussion will be, what are the strategies? Can you walk away? Can you use humor? I put this twice on purpose. Usually you're just going to walk away. You can sometimes use, parent number 2 can sometimes use hand signals to indicate excessive tone or the need to walk away. Try to do it out of sight with the person with Prader-Willi syndrome so that they don't have the satisfaction of getting another member of the family into trouble with mom or dad. And their focus can be on either one. And it's always interesting to me why it's very strong with one parent or not the other. And usually it's the parent who's getting suckered. It may not have anything to do with the basic relationship. Okay, So your family has rules. I suggest adding this rule in order to avoid the Prader-Willi police. I just want to say that we do have a website. We do have a number of handouts on the website, and I have a dream of also having podcasts on the website. We have a page on the website where the handouts are in Spanish for those of you who are counseling Spanish-speaking families, or anyone else who wants the Spanish language handouts. They haven't all been translated, but and we welcome anyone who wants to do some translating for us. There's a DVD that was made with a simple explanation of the basics of food and food security, and it can be a good tool for training schools and other staff that are coming on board in your child's life. And thank you.
Thank you, Janice. As usual, you have brilliant analogies. And please, everyone, if you have questions, utilize the chat function on your app there. And I do have some questions already queued up for you, Linda. What role does sweetness, real or artificial, play in the activation of hyperphagia?
Big. It's a big role, and it doesn't matter whether it's artificial. Thank you for the question, because it's artificial or real. And so for a long time, we did recommend artificial sweeteners. I no longer do that.
Okay. What do you recommend for families that may have received a later diagnosis and may have already developed some bad habits unknowingly?
Yes, of course. And even without a late diagnosis, families easily fall into bad habits without even realizing it. You might have to get some help, but a number of the strategies, actually, I have a handout on our website called Making Changes, and it goes through the steps of introducing new rules and new expectations into your child's life. And it takes a team approach in order to do that.
Yeah. Next question is, do some locks cause more anxiety? We have a lock with pictures. There's like a heart and a note, and we've had no problems for 4 years. But recently, this child cracked the code and then cracked the new code a few days later. She knows how she can open it if she tries.
All I can say is you have to just keep looking for other locks. I couldn't tell you whether or not it's about anxiety. If the child knows that she can crack the lock, she's going to have anxiety because she no longer has food security. I don't think the lock itself, the style of the lock, is so important. But talk to other parents and find out which locks their geniuses have not been able to crack. I'll never forget one young man walked up to a lock seller's table at the Prader-Willi conference, and he just went and opened up every single lock and said, "These won't work."
Yeah. Hey, I think it might be nice, Linda, if you could go back to your slide where that website is for parents while I continue to ask some more questions.
Here's our website.
Yeah. So do you have any advice on how to handle the same question being asked over and over and over? I don't know if it's for attention or truly a memory problem.
Yes. We call it perseveration. It's as a source of stress. One study we did with parents, it really showed it was the biggest source of stress for parents day to day. Sometimes you can mitigate this. You can decrease it. You won't get rid of it altogether. Part of this has to do with the behavioral analysis. Is the child asking the question over and over and over because he actually doesn't have confidence about what's really going to happen. And so, you know, things like schedules and routine and so forth. But I know that he already knows. I'm sure lots of parents already use the strategy. Well, what you know the answer, what's the answer, and make him do the answer. There's a group of kids who have a nonverbal learning disability, and that's their way of pinging mom every 15 seconds. They're very highly anxious kids, and they don't have the skills to actually engage in a real conversation, or they don't want to put out the effort that a real conversation takes. So they keep asking the same question. There's one routine that I like that is, I've answered that question quite a few times. Now I'm going to answer only 3 more times. And so each time you answer, you remind them, now I'm only going to answer that question 2 more times. Now I'm only going to answer that question 1 more time. And then I'm not going to answer anymore, but I'm not being rude. I'm just not going to answer the question anymore. You can try that. I suspect it works only every now and then. One young man who had a nonverbal learning disability was doing this in the classroom. And so this worked. The teacher gave him 5 tickets. And he was told that after he used up those tickets, he couldn't ask any more questions. And so he actually restricted himself because he did not like giving up those tickets. And so you could try that in the home. It's a very concrete way of which makes them give something up. So he basically postponed the question and ended up not even using all his tickets. Again, I don't know that will work for every child, but do look for the underlying anxiety, do look for the underlying uncertainty. What else about that? That's all, I guess.
That was great. Next question is, what is a low-key response to food stealing? Could you describe a little bit more about that?
Sure. Dr. Forster has a great story about this. So one of her patients was caught in the refrigerator at night, and the staff person came in, surprised him, and the staff person said, "Oh, I must have forgotten to lock the refrigerator." Okay, so it was a very matter of fact response instead of, "Tommy, what are you doing in there?" That's what I mean by a low-key response. So the person with Prader-Willi syndrome said, "No, you didn't forget to lock the refrigerator. See, I have a key."
That's great. And that's just non-judgmental, non-blame or shame. So that's great.
That and also, and you don't have to take the blame yourself, which the staff person did. But the important thing is your tone. Now, Dr. Forster referred to low expressed emotion. We do a whole talk, and there's a handout on the website on in the down where it says downloads. Low expressed emotion is just the #1 skill that you want to have to develop when you're dealing with somebody with Prader-Willi syndrome, because when you use tone, and Clint referred to this too, when you use tone, you jack up their adrenaline, and that's your fight or flight hormone. And usually it turns into fight.
Thank you. What can be done to help siblings understand and become active partners in making a safe environment?
A lot of work, but you teach them what you've learned. Give them a lot. You may have a behavior plan for the siblings, you know, so that they can be rewarded for staying on track. Kids are going to forget. I wouldn't ever chew them out for messing up, because it's just part of being a kid that they're inattentive and that they mess up, and you don't want them to resent the restrictions. There's enough restrictions and inconveniences of having a sibling with Prader-Willi syndrome. You certainly don't want to add to that they get in trouble because of the syndrome. But mostly I would say I'm taking a very, very positive approach with constant reminders and not any blame.
All right, thank you. Next question. Is there a point at which a child becomes aware they are being provided with an alternative that isn't a true substitute, such as getting lentil pasta instead of real pasta, or getting frozen Greek yogurt, not ice cream? How can we help PWS kids understand that?
Um, I'm not sure what the problem is. For the most part, it has to do with expectations. So anytime you're making a substitution and you think they're going to know the difference, you simply explain in advance. I wouldn't say instead of pasta, we're going to have lentil pasta. I would say, hey, tonight we're trying a new pasta. I wouldn't draw the connection between the real thing and the what I call fake food. They enjoy everything to some degree, as long as they're not expecting something that they prefer more. But they are very rigid, even about changes. They can get very upset about any change, and it really has less to do with what's being changed as just the fact that there's a change. One technique I've liked is using, this helps kids get through the day when they have a substitute teacher or substitute food, is use a change card. And this is a big yellow laminated card, and it says change on it. And so you just pull out the card and you show them the card, and then they process the fact that there's going to be a change before they have to process what the change is. Okay, and that separates those two mental tasks for them, because they don't do well with multitasking in any sense, and they can only think of one thing at a time. So you stress them out a little bit with the fact that there's going to be a change, and then you tell them what the change is, and then you remain calm while they may or may not act out on it.
Wonderful. Just wanted to let you know that in our in the question session, many thank yous for over the years of very solid, easy to apply advice. So thank you from everyone here. The next question is, my child doesn't seek food but wakes me up at 6, telling me that she doesn't feel well and is hungry. And can I please try to help her? I try to delay until 7 o'clock in the morning, but she persists in her complaint. Are there any suggestions for that?
Sure. If you don't want her to eat until 7 o'clock, don't ever, whenever somebody says to me, I try to do this, I know that they aren't being consistent. Okay. So if you once out of 20 times feed her before 7 o'clock, it's over. So you remind her that it's going to be 7 o'clock, and you give her something else to do. Not too rewarding, or you tell her flat out, you need to go back to bed, and you will be fed at 7 o'clock. And you may have to do that 5 or 10 times and put up with a few temper tantrums before she really believes that she has to wait until 7 o'clock. And by the way, she's not hungry. And I think knowing that she's not hungry will give you a little more courage.
Great, thank you. I think you kind of addressed this, but this question is, what's the harm in flavored zero calorie beverages?
No harm. I'm okay with people drinking 0 calorie beverages unless they're sweetened. If they're sweetened because they increase that reward drive, a lot of families get into a lot of tussles about how much the person can have. Because they want to overdo it. The main thing is, if with the flavored water, which isn't terribly sweet, and most of them don't like unflavored water, I'm well aware of that. You just have to lock it up and control it. They can't have free access to it, especially if they're on medication, but even folks who aren't on medication, because they can drive down their sodium by drinking too much of it.
Yeah, great. That's perfect. Another question would be, how do I know when to start my child on medications?
Oh, that's another lecture.
Okay. Would there be any way?
Behavior alone is not an indication. Get that food security in control, okay? And then get some consultation about what it is that makes you wonder if they should be on medication.
Great. So, question, would you then assert that most behaviors come from the lack of food security?
Well, when people didn't have food security, yes, that was definitely the case. But I've got families who really have very, very good food security, and they still have behavioral issues. I like to quote, it was Jim Loker's wife who said, um, help me with the name. Anyway, she said, food is the least of our problems. And that is really true, that you can make food a non-problem, but it doesn't eliminate all the other issues. And the cognitive rigidity is a huge part of the other behavior problems.
Question, do you recommend a watch that reminds PWS kids when it's time to eat?
I could see that backfiring pretty badly. So I don't recommend a watch at all, because I prefer to say, we're going to do our chores, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to take a walk, and then we're going to eat. If you say we're going to eat at 12:15, they're going to be on your case at 12:14. You know, I prefer to use the sequence of events in the course of the day and not pin down the exact minute, because boy, they'll hold you to it.
All right. Next question. Do you recommend having a child or PWS child take the DNA test to find out which medicine works best for them?
The first place, those tests don't do that. What they do is they tell you, if you have somebody who has not done well on a number of different medications, particularly if they've had unusually strong adverse effects at low doses, or if they've just not responded at all to high doses, which it could be a whole other analysis. But those tests basically tell if you are a rapid or a slow metabolizer of that particular drug. And the problem, some people think that this has something to do with the slow metabolism of Prader-Willi syndrome. It does not. That's your muscle metabolism. These tests are testing liver metabolism. But by and large, we reserve those tests for people who have to be on multiple medications. Some of the folks we're treating for cyclic mood disorders, which often do require more than one medication to get through. But no, it's not something you do routinely. It's a tool we use when things are getting complicated. But it will not say this drug is good for your child. That is not the case.
Good. Thank you.
I will quote Dr. Forster again on the whole issue of medication in Prader-Willi syndrome. There is no psychotropic medication that we give because the person has Prader-Willi syndrome. That is, Prader-Willi syndrome is not an indication for any particular medication. On the other hand, there's no medication that we never give because the person has Prader-Willi syndrome. There are a handful of medications, more than a handful, that we give with extra caution because the person has Prader-Willi syndrome. And the anti-anxiety and antidepressant medications are in that category.
All right, we have 1 minute left, so one more question. Do you recommend social stories to help with transitions?
Oh, yes. Love them.
Okay, well, maybe that was quick. My child will have a tantrum when food gets stuck in her teeth. How can I prevent this?
Aw. Oh, I don't know. I suppose you could give her, I don't know how good her communication skills are, but you can certainly give her prompts during the meal and say, well, tell me if you're getting food stuck in your teeth, and I'll help you, so that her tension about the food in her teeth doesn't build up into a tantrum. You might be able to head it off that way.
All right, well, thank you. And that is the close of our session. Thank you so much. Please remember to take the survey after. And thank you once again, Dr. Gurash.
Thank you, Lynn. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.